I grew up in Harlem, but I didn't know much about its history except that Oliver Hardy was born here and there's a festival dedicated to him every year. So I decided to head back to Harlem and learn a little bit more about my hometown history.
The minute you drive in Harlem, you are home wherever you go.
Harlem is a small town on the southern border of Columbia County. While many towns in the county are growing rapidly and beginning to blend together, Harlem remains a small town and true to its roots. Megan Foster, director of the Harlem Museum, explains that Harlem was built to be a bit of an oasis.
Well, it actually started before the incorporation of Harlem. There was a city or a town nearby called Sawdust, which was basically a stop for the train. And the area was very rowdy.
Sawdust was situated along the Georgia Railroad that ran from Augusta to Eatonton. It had a reputation for being a bit like the Wild West. In 1857, Dr. Andrew Sanders, one of the first graduates of the Medical College of Georgia, moved to an area about a mile from Sawdust. 8 years later, railroad engineer Noonan Hicks built a home near Dr. Sanders, and together they founded a new town.
So they decided to try to make a new city nearby that was more less morally corrupt, let's put it that way. And they ended up trying to name the city Sylvan.
A visitor from New York suggested that this town should be named Harlem because it was a resort, and that's what original Harlem in New York was.
Harlem was chartered in 1870 and quickly began to grow, eventually absorbing Sawdust and other nearby communities. Dr. Sanders was its first mayor. During the summer, disease carried by mosquitoes near the Savannah River increased, making Harlem a popular getaway destination.
Harlem sits about 500 feet above the Augusta riverbed, and folks from Augusta would come to Harlem as a summer resort to get out of the conditions there in Augusta.
Harlem was mostly a farming town, and a fertilizer plant grew up from that and helped to sustain the town. Harlem was also a hub for the arts.
They had the Columbian Opera House and the first theater in Harlem, Georgia, and Columbia County. It was a Star Theater.
Roxanne Whitaker is the mayor of Harlem. She says that Harlem thrived as a farming, tourist, and railroad town until the early 1900s, when tragedy struck.
And then it was devastated in, I think it was 1917 when the fire came through. And Harlem didn't really recover from its tourist aspect.
It might have been the fertilizer plant that might have set it off, because nitrate can do that. But we don't have any confirmation of what actually started it, but it did take out quite a lot.
The fire destroyed the fertilizer plant and the Opera House, among other buildings. One large industry business survived the fire, Lucky Lady Pecan, later known as the Tracy Lucky Pecan Company. It was part of Harlem's culture for more than 100 years.
It was the largest pecan producer, I guess is what it was, in the nation. And so Mr. Tracy would get pecans from all over the United States, come here, process them, and resell them.
Tracy Lucky was the largest employer in Harlem for a long time. Turner was an employee for years.
And the Tracy Lucky Company, when I worked there in the 1980s, was the largest sheller of pecans in the world. And one of my jobs as export manager was to send container loads on ships to Europe and England and Africa.
Every small town has its founding families and its prominent families. Harlem is no different, and some notable families include the Hatchers and the Clarys. Whitaker thinks it's part of the town's charm.
My grandfather had a gas station that was right on the other side of this building. You have the Hicks family. They're not here any longer, but you know, their namesakes here. We have a street name from them. The Moon family, his historical house is still here. His daughter is a children's author, Miss Helen Kellerman. So all of them have left roots here to help us grow and to be who we are.
One of the many legacies left to Harlem from its founders are deep religious roots. In fact, it has more churches than one would normally see in a town its size.
It was supposed to be a biblical Christian background, and from there it sprung up. And that might be why we have 20-something churches just in the from I-20 to the other side of our city limits.
I think it's just part of Harlem's history that does relate back to the type of community that was wanted here, that there would be a lot of churches, and that remains so today.
Two of the most prominent churches in town are Harlem Baptist and Harlem United Methodist. Whitaker says there's a funny story behind the founding of the two churches.
And it's kind of ironic. People laugh because the Methodist church and the Baptist church share a piece of property. And Mr. Sanders, and I don't remember which was which, either he was Baptist or his wife was Baptist. One of them was Baptist, one of them was Methodist. And he just bought the property and gave it to them, I guess, to keep family peace.
Harlem was a city of firsts, both in Columbia County and in Georgia. Among those, the town boasts the first traffic light in Columbia County, and today Harlem still only has one traffic light in town.
We had the first opera house, the first bank, the first hospital.
We had the first woman who was elected to a public office, that was Mrs. McDaniel, and that was for the state of Georgia, not just Columbia County. We also had Harold Scott, who was the first black bus driver in Columbia County as well.
In the 1920s, Carrie McDaniel was appointed to fill her deceased husband's term as Columbia County tax collector and ran for the seat herself and won. This was before women were even eligible to vote. In 1948, Harold Scott was asked by the superintendent to drive children going to the African American schools. He used his own car to do so before buying his own school bus. And of course, we can't forget Harlem's big claim to fame. It's the birthplace of silent film star Oliver Hardy.
It was known that he was born here but did not live here even for the first year of his life. However, because he became a true silent film star and was in Hollywood, he became known worldwide.
In 1989, Harlem hosted its first Oliver Hardy Festival, an event previously known as the Pecan Festival. Now, tens of thousands of people attend it each year. Hardy came back to Harlem on occasion to visit family.
Mr. Hardy's relatives still live in Harlem. Coach Jimmy Lewis is a relative of his. So that's something you probably didn't know.
Not know.
Yes.
Columbia County has been experiencing major growth over the past decade, and Harlem has too. But it's deliberate growth designed to retain the town's small-town charm.
We sent out a survey to the residents, what do you want to see in Harlem? What do you want the atmosphere of Harlem to be? And a majority of them said we want to keep our small-town feeling.
Harlem is very much the same today as it was when I first moved here in 1955.
I asked Mayor Whitaker the burning question everybody in Harlem wants to know: will the restaurant Chicken Taters ever make a comeback? Sadly, the answer to that is not anytime soon. Hey, CSRA, that's just part of your hometown history. In Harlem, Kim Vickers, WJBF, News Channel 6.